Hey, what's up, guys? Ryan, how's everybody doing today?
Chillin'.
Chilling.
Yes, sir.
How's life treating you over there, Tony?
Life's treating me pretty good, man. I can't complain. You know.
You have a question.
Mm-hmm.
What does sobriety mean to you?
To me?
Yes.
That's a good fucking question.
So sobriety means to me is honestly, it's not even. I mean, sobriety is sobriety. Sobriety is staying sober, staying clean and sober, staying off of drugs and alcohol. But for me, it's more of like a lifestyle. It's not just the drugs and alcohol. It's lifestyle. It's staying away from people who are selling drugs and staying away from the negative energies that I had in the world before, and just keeping myself rooted in people who are doing better with their lives.
Okay. Makes sense.
So basically, changing the people around you, changing your thought process, and just trying to be a better version of yourself.
Well, I mean, all right, so when it comes down to we're talking about sobriety for me has changed over time with learning. I no longer really follow any of the sober culture, as you would say, like the traditional 12-step sober culture or whatever like that. I've found that to me those things are kind of pointless, because the work that you get to do there is still good, and you still get to do work on yourself, like within, so all that mental work of fixing up and working on your triggers and all that stuff, that's good, but you don't need to go to a 12-step to do that. Like, you can do that at a psychiatrist's office. I am now a firm believer that drugs and alcohol are not the problem. They are a symptom of the problem. After starting to work in the mental health field, now I'm starting to see the other side of the coin that I didn't see before, that I didn't realize was there. And I'm seeing that everything that I had going on in my life wasn't because of drugs and alcohol. The drugs and alcohol were there because of the things that I had in my life. So it was like the reverse of what I actually thought. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does, man. I understand that completely, coming from the same background. I suffered many traumas as a kid growing up. I've suffered, undiagnosed mental illnesses that I didn't know how to deal with, and nobody ever taught me how to deal with them. So I dealt with them the best way I knew how, which is what my parents taught me to do, was party, do drugs, drink, sleep around. Like, that's the type of environment that I grew up in. We used to run away from our problems or cover them up or numb them out, and maybe they would resurface later on in life. Who the hell knows? But usually we would just cover them up to the point until, self-destruction was like inevitable.
That's what a lot of people do. They use drugs and alcohol for an escape, something where they're going through. So they do drugs and alcohol, and then they get addicted to them. So, then it's...
Right. It reaches a point, you don't start the drugs because you're addicted to them. Like, you start them if you're looking for that escape. But then at some point in time, it transfers over, and then it does become a problem. The drugs and the alcohol do become a problem. But just like anything else, any other mental health disorder that you have, you got to deal with it. 9 times out of 10, that involves some sort of treatment, or like Tony was saying about, going to a therapist and just working out your problems.
Right, because it's all about feeling better, right? So to me, if it's all about feeling better, drugs aren't necessarily what's going to make me feel better all the time. Like, I want to feel better permanently. So the drugs and alcohol were just there. Working on myself is now in the forefront. Like you had asked about sobriety. And to me, it's not about being sober anymore. Because if I make it about being sober, that's going to end. Does that make sense? Like, if I put that in the forefront and say, this is what I'm living my life by, I'm going to fail. Because I'm thinking about it and it's consciously there. Now, I keep it there. It's still on my mind. I just don't make it the forefront of everything so that I'm not so overwhelmed.
And that's actually like a really good point, because there, I can't lie. Like, I've gone through 12-step fellowship, and I found some freedom in the work that I've done there, but like a hardcore 12-stepper, that's all they focus on is I made it through clean. I made it through clean. But there's more to just making it through clean. Like, are you still okay after you got on the other side clean? You know, because sometimes, like, okay, we might have made it through that day and we didn't pick up and use, but there's still, did you treat what the problem was that was causing you to want to use?
Right. And, like, so they have, I don't know how new it is, so take whatever I'm saying with a grain of salt, but, like, to me it's a new thing that I've just seen, but, like, they have the studies on that, so, like, I have this problem. I've done so many drugs, and this is so messed up, but I've done so much drugs and alcohol that every once in a while I will, in the middle of what I'm talking about, forget what I'm talking about. So please remind me what I was just saying.
About the studies on 12-step work.
That's crazy, right?
It
Dude,
is
I fried my brain so much
I believe it.
from doing drugs that I forget what I'm talking about in the middle of while I'm talking. It's insane. So the studies on the 12-step work now, 12-step all came around because a bunch of guys who worked in mental health were like, hey, this kind of reminds us of these mental health problems, and this is how we treated those, so why don't we use this to treat alcoholism? So they started using their mental health studies to treat alcoholism, mixed with religion. Like, honestly, anybody who's been there has seen it. It's all based on religion, but they're using the mental health treatment to treat substance abuse disorder, which is now, and this is the part I was saying, like, I'm not sure how new this is, but which is now on the spectrum for mental health disorders. So, like, there's 7 or 8 different types of mental health disorders, and that's one of them on the list. And, I mean, that's the first thing that people hear about when they think recovery is they think drugs and alcohol. Well, drugs and alcohol sometimes is what steps people into recovery, but recovery has actually been a mental health thing before it was anything, you know, and the same methods that are used to treat drugs and alcohol are used to treat almost every mental health disorder. You know, it doesn't, I mean, there's some things that can be treated with medication, but it's usually the work that you do and building your coping skills and stuff like that to deal with your symptoms, whatever your symptoms may be. It's those things, working on those things that are the core of getting better.
And that's recovery in general, not just from drugs and alcohol, not just
Right.
mental health, dealing with trauma, grief.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people that I know personally have done some serious jail time and have gotten like PTSD just from being locked down, either in solitary confinement or having to, you know, look over their shoulders all the time because, you know, sometimes when you go to state prison or federal prison, you know, you're on edge the whole time you're there, you know, and they come home and they don't know how to react to quote unquote normal society. You know, they stay on edge, they stay looking over their shoulders, and they're usually quick. What is that word? Short fused. You know what I'm saying? So like just an everyday interaction that you or I could have could trigger these people into fits of rage, you know, and are prone to violence because they weren't treated properly. You know, and that's a whole another subject in itself is how, you know, the lack of mental health treatment is in our prison systems is today. But that's a whole nother ball game we'll get into later on. But like what I'm saying is it's still the same concept though. You still got to put in some sort of footwork and internalize it to make yourself better, to make your brain process things better. Like you said, coping skills. You got to have some sort of coping skill, no matter what it is. Like as long as it's a positive way of processing through whatever you're dealing with.
Absolutely.
That has a lot to do with mental health. Is a lot of coping skills, the way to learn how to deal with things, and you know, different ways. I learned how to deal with it.
I want to know how you dodged a bullet. Like, so you've been dealing with things, you know, like you didn't know what exactly you were dealing with, but you've been dealing with things your whole life that usually sends people fucking hurling into drug addiction, but you managed to dodge that bullet. How'd you pull that one off?
Well, I mean, I know a lot of friends and a lot of family members that go through that drug addiction process, and I didn't want to go that route because it's a spiral downhill. It's worse. It gets worse. So I don't know really how I dealt with it. I just kind of
quote unquote one of the lucky ones.
I kept a lot of things in. I don't talk about a lot of things. I keep a lot of things in, and my mentality is like, fuck it. And, you know, that's the way I look at a lot of things. Fuck it and just move on from it. So I push it all to the side. So when a lot of things pile up, I just explode. You know, when things get me mad, it's just that short fuse that just gets you. And I do have a short fuse. I really do. And I'm working on it every day. It's a process. I mean, and it's not only with sobriety, with mental health. It's a process for everybody, and it's a challenge every single day for even recovering. Somebody in recovery, it's a challenge every day.
Growing in general is a challenge. You know, maturing and actually being willing to mature as we get older.
Oh yeah,
it's a process all on its own.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people can still make fart noises, and I'm dying laughing.
Oh yeah,
dude. Like a 5-year-old, you know. But like at the same time, like I can see things a little bit more clear. Just like for instance, like stuff, you know, movies and stuff that I watched as a kid, you know, and seeing these quotes, right? And it's like surface level stuff when you're a kid, like, oh man, stand up for yourself. But like it means something different today. Like when I rewatch these movies from my childhood, you know, like movies like The Lion King, right? Like the kid lost his dad, and he was made to believe that it was his fault. So he had all this guilt and shame, and he runs away, and he's afraid to face his family. And then he finds out later in life, like it wasn't even his fault, and he came back and he stood his ground. You know, like I wasn't seeing that when I was 5-6 years old. I didn't see the metaphors that were buried in these movies. You know.
Yeah, it's deep. It definitely runs deep in that.
You know, Storm, you were talking about too, like you know, you've seen like other family members go through drug addiction and how they spiraled out of control. And I remember like when I was like in my early teens, and I had maybe smoked some weed and maybe drank some beer on occasion. Like I wasn't really doing drugs and drinking at that point. Like it was like an experimentation.
Being a teenager.
Right. And I've seen like my one older cousin and an uncle of mine go through active heroin addiction and how quickly things like spun out of control for them. And I remember thinking, like, when I was at that age, like, man, I don't want nothing to do with that. I don't want to be a part of that. And then just like that, I was introduced to, you know, like painkillers and Xanax and shit like that. And without even thinking about it, not even realizing and being able to see, like, where I was heading, I ended up just like them. Maybe not just like them, but in the same similar situations that they were in, battling an addiction that I knew nothing about.
Yeah. It's weird. The only thing I ever been addicted to was cigarettes. And I quit. I took Chantix for a while and I quit, and I haven't smoked a cigarette in probably like 6-7 months. But I never really had any addiction. And it's funny to say. I like smoking weed. I drink occasionally, but like I always had that mentality of my job does drug tests. So I always had that mentality of
You got that
my
killer
job. My
too.
job is really, really important. So I
Yeah.
kept that in the back of my mind that I'm not going to do it because of that. And you know, my job and my career is way more important because if I fail a drug test, I lose my CDL.
Mm.
So, and that's my livelihood. That's my job.
Yeah, that's everything for you right now.
So, and I know a lot of people that, you know, had that, you know, heroin addiction or crack addiction or painkillers, and it's not something that I really wanted to go through, and I hate seeing somebody go through it, so I didn't want to put myself in that situation.
Got
So
you.
that's why I steered away from it.
And I think that's just a sign of like a healthy thought process to begin
Yeah.
with. You know what I'm saying? Like
It's
like
tough.
just because you don't deal with like the addiction side of things, I mean the mental health thing is still there, right? Because like
Oh,
I think
yeah.
I think most of society deals with some form of mental health issue that they just don't address. You know what I'm saying? But like you were saying, like that thought process, like, man, I don't want to lose this job. I don't want to lose that. When it came to me, when I was introduced to my love affair with opiates, it didn't even matter. Parole didn't matter. Jail didn't matter. Like, I didn't care, man. My parole man hated the way I pissed in
Usually
his
don't
cup.
care.
I didn't. I
Yeah.
really didn't.
That's the non-care attitude that people have.
Exactly.
They don't care if you're gonna die, or you don't care if you're fucking your family over.
Exactly.
This
And
was
care.
one of the things that actually like started to change my mind about the way my thought process was. I remember being